Are you curious about what yoga looks like off the mat, or keen to hear how yogis all around the world live? This show will let you in on the secret that there's no such thing as a perfect yogi. Welcome to the Plant-Powered Yoga Podcast. Please welcome your host, yoga teacher, coffee lover, vegan, and known as the Plant-Powered Yogi, Jess Ivers. Hello yogis, Jess here. Welcome to episode 3 of season 2 of the Plant-Powered Yoga Podcast. This week's special guest is Amy Leonard-King, joining me from Melbourne, who owns Yoga Corner right in the heart of Melbourne, right in the CBD. And we spoke on the day that yoga studios were reopening in Melbourne after their quite severe lockdown. So right actually before we jumped on the call, Amy had a call from someone asking about classes that day and where could they book, and it was just really nice to see someone who owns a business in Melbourne recovering in that way, and that people are really excited to get back into the yoga practice. Now, Amy and I touched on a little bit about Ahimsa and veganism that goes with yoga. And if you haven't listened to last week's episode about Ahimsa, maybe jumping in and listening to that first before Amy and I go into it a little more. But enjoy the chat with Amy, and hope you learn lots from her in this chat. All right, welcome to the latest episode of the Plant-Powered Yoga Podcast. I'm here with Amy Leonard-King, who's joining me from Melbourne. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you so much, Jess. So happy to be here.
Now, today is a very exciting day in Melbourne. It's the day that yoga studios have reopened post-COVID lockdown. How are you feeling?
Very excited. I think it's serendipitous that our chat has happened on this day. It's very exciting times. It's obviously been a really challenging time for everyone through the year. But I think there's a real positivity in the air now here in Melbourne. And it will just be so special to have people joining together again for the practice of yoga, which as we all know, anyone who has practiced together in community has so much more potency and power to it.
Interesting that the word yoga means union, and for so long it's been apart, and so now it feels like it's all coming back together.
Absolutely. It's I've been really impressed and amazed by how people have taken to practicing yoga online, doing it at home. It really speaks to the importance of it in people's lives, and being able to connect in whatever way that we can, coming together, even if it is in the online space and in different localities. But that coming together is so important for us as humans on this planet.
Absolutely. Well, I'm very excited to have you, one, on the podcast, and B, excited to have you back in the studio. Now, starting way back when, your journey into yoga, and we'll touch on lots of different things in our chat, but how did you find yoga, and where did it start for you, and how did it all begin?
I've been asked that question so many times, and so I've had to file back in my memory many years, because I think I came across meditation probably as a young teenager, to be honest. So meditation first, through the pathway of being an elite athlete and having to, work in the mind space in preparation for having a strong mind space for competition, basically, and performance. So that I only realized a few years ago in that kind of essence of life and yoga, and how did it all come together. In terms of asana practice, I think I came across it first on a video. Yes, a video, not a DVD. That's how old I am. When I was about 18 years old, I think my sister had a yoga video at home, and so I gave it a try, and it felt really good. And that's where I started. And then I guess I went from there into the space of a gym. I had a gym membership, so it was kind of accessible and didn't feel scary to go to a kind of a yoga class in a gym. And then really, I think my reflection is that the time that you spend in a yoga practice is so powerfully connecting that it stays with you. And so you can remember those moments more than you can remember a whole lot of other moments that happen in your life. And so you can look back at the past and go, wow, okay, I remember how I felt when I was in that yoga class in the gym, or doing those yoga practices on the video at home. And something stays with you. And so it stayed with me, whether it's been off and on, which it was for perhaps the first, 5 to 8 years maybe, before it became more of an established kind of day-to-day thing.
Cool. What was your sport of choice back in the day of your elite athleticism?
Rhythmic gymnastics.
Amazing.
With the ribbons and the balls and the hoops and
Oh, so cool. I love watching the Olympics and just being like, oh, look at that performance, and just wishing I could do those things. Oh, that's so fun.
It's really impressive. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah. Oh, golly. Good on you.
And a lifetime ago.
Yeah, golly. Now, your training and whatnot, when did you decide you wanted to become a yoga teacher?
In my mid-20s, I was sort of traveling around Europe. I'd done the whole, okay, let's move to Europe. I spent a year in France, and then I moved to the UK, did my 2-year visa there, working holiday visa. And I was searching, I was seeking, I was graduated from university in commerce and finance. I was working in kind of, that finance industry, very not me, really. I was in my mid-20s and didn't know who I was or really what I was seeking. And so that kind of kept me coming back to the yoga mat. I found a studio in London that really felt like home, away from home. And really that's the essence of the practice, isn't it, right? It's a coming home. So it was there where I'd done sort of a lot of soul searching. What am I going to do? What am I going to do with my life? What am I going to be? What job am I going to have? And then it sort of led to this, okay, well, one thing that I know that is really speaking to me is the practice of yoga. And so why don't I dive a little bit deeper? And I had no intention of ever teaching a yoga class in my life. That terrified me, but I knew that I wanted to know more, and that there was something that, the teachers were sharing in their classes that was just so magical and relevant to life that I wanted to know about. So I took a first 200-hour teacher training with my studio in London, my home studio, Yoga Haven, and that was it, really.
Never looked back.
Never looked back.
Wow, that's a common trait I'm finding with a few yoga teachers. It's like I know everyone gives a lot of stick to 200-hour trainings, but it really is. I love that it's that little taste you get for it, and then you can decide what you want to do with it from there. Because most of the time you'll do that and think, I want to learn more, and you know that that's never going to be enough to know everything. And I mean, even you can do all the trainings in the world and never know everything.
Absolutely. It's the taster that lets you take a step through the door and see the world that is available through the eyes of a yogi. So
now you are very exciting to have a fellow vegan on the podcast as well, obviously. Your journey into veganism and how that came about for you as well.
Yeah, so that first 200-hour training actually was, we spent about 2.5 weeks in Morocco in a kind of intensive experience of the training. And it was all meals were included, and it was all vegetarian, and a couple of the teachers on the course were vegan as well. So it was kind of this first opening of my eyes as to, okay, why and what would that be for? Not entirely, because if I look back now through a more clear lens, I can see that I was never really into meat or animal products. It was just, it never sat well with me, and perhaps I didn't know why, to what degree. But after 2 and a bit weeks of eating vegetarian, only I couldn't go back, basically. I couldn't go back. And there were a couple of times in the training where we spoke to or listened to the teachers sharing about why a yogi might choose a vegetarian or vegan diet. And really it was this moment of feeling so deeply into my own body physically, and then a comparison with that of an animal and thinking, what's the difference? What's the difference? And so that flipped my perspective entirely. And I've basically never eaten meat since. So that was 10 years ago.
Wow. Oh, so exciting.
Yeah, it's a journey. It's always a journey, right? Veganism was a little further along the track, and that came through more insight into more recent, I guess, documentaries such as Cowspiracy, such as What the Health, Forks Over Knives. Is that the right way I'm saying it?
Yes.
Yep. And sort of via a deeper understanding, basically, which is the same as the path of yoga, the path of life. We're always expanding our knowledge and expanding our awareness, expanding our understanding as to how things work. And so really the realization of, is this really good for me? And then is it good for the animals? And is it good for the planet? And if the answer is a resounding no, then then we make the switch.
And like, that's a big cross. Now, you're one of very, I guess, few Jivamukti yoga teachers in Melbourne specifically. I don't know how many there are in Australia, but for those who are listening who might not know what Jivamukti yoga is, can you wrap it up in a nutshell for us?
Yeah, I can try. My teachers, Sharon and David, have a tagline that Jivamukti Yoga is the path to enlightenment through compassion for all beings. So that's one way that you can sum it up in a sentence. In terms of the practice itself, it has 5 tenets, 5 pillars by which the practice is shared and taught and experienced, which might make it a different experience for you stepping into a Jivamukti class as compared with another style of yoga. It's also one of the 9 recognized forms of hatha yoga in the world. So it's a hatha method. It's derived in terms of the asana practice, you could say it's derived from Ashtanga yoga. So there's a couple of different kind of strains and connecting points, but really a path to enlightenment through compassion for all beings. So veganism, and in particular the practice of Ahimsa, the first of Patanjali's yamas, as you know, is one of those tenets. And so that's where you'll see the kind of connection with vegetarianism, veganism, living a life that aims to create the least amount of harm to all living beings, and seeing how that then circulates back to yourself. If you're seeking happiness, but creating harm or violence in your life, then it's unlikely to be circling back to you.
And it's funny that mention of Ahimsa and how often that gets, I think we were speaking about this a little while ago, about that some people see that as non-violence to themselves. And you actually explained it really well, how the difference between the yamas and the niyamas are the way that you project or the way that you do things to yourself and do things to others. And Ahimsa obviously being something that, you want to live in a way that's non-violent to others.
Yeah, absolutely. So we do hear it, the yamas and niyamas perhaps getting slightly confused in the yoga world, and not to anyone's fault or detriment, just because perhaps it's a way to understand first, for people to understand how to relate to oneself, perhaps it's an easier pathway. Perhaps it seems more important. I don't know. But my teacher, Sharon, flips it and says the absolute opposite is true, that the way that we relate to others is the first step, as Patanjali said, a couple thousand years ago. And, his writing, his piece, the Yoga Sutra, is considered like the Bible of yoga. And we should, if we're wanting to teach from that, we should probably look a little bit deeper and truly understand what it comes from. And the yamas are definitely steps towards how we relate to others and the world around us. And so we really should be looking in terms of ahimsa. How do I treat others? How do I think, speak, and act towards others? Not just the most obvious acting, or of course I'm not harmful to others. Of course I don't, cause physical harm. But in terms of our thoughts and our words, that all of these, Patanjali uses the word pratastayam, which means to be firmly established in. So if we are seeking enlightenment, which also could be happiness or joy, whatever word you want to pop in there that speaks to you, enlightenment, seeking happiness, we're all seeking happiness, I think. If we're seeking that, then we want to be firmly established in these guidelines and in these practices, and they will help to take us there.
That's beautiful. You sum it up way better than I can, so that's good.
Not at all.
And when did you decide that you wanted to study more on that topic, and then obviously study Jivamukti Yoga and become a Jivamukti Yoga teacher? Where did that all come from?
Yes, so I guess it came the other way around. I didn't seek to particularly study from the topic of veganism or ahimsa in particular. What spoke to me when I practiced Jivamukti Yoga, which happened in Sydney. There's a Jivamukti Centre in Sydney, and across the world in travels. There's Jivamukti Yoga in North America, in Europe, a lot more than in my hometown of Melbourne. The practice spoke to me in ways that nothing else had. It seemed to cover a lot more. I seemed to come out of a practice feeling much more connected to myself and the universe, for lack of a better word there, but fully connected, let's say, fully connected. So it was effective. The practice was effective. And it also, I felt like I learned something in every class. I wasn't just sitting there doing some moves and letting my mind kind of, float around to whatever. It really captivated my attention. And so it was Jivamukti that led me down the path of wanting to learn more. And I did an immersion, a 3-day long weekend immersion in Sydney with Yogeshwari, one of the advanced certified teachers from New York. She was visiting 2012 or 13. And it took me, I think, 3 to 4 years from that point. But I knew I would do the training at some point, but it's a big step. So it took me 3 or 4 years from then to take the leap.
Well, we're very glad that you did. And you teach Jivamukti. You're one of the very few teachers in Melbourne that teach Jivamukti classes to the public. Obviously, last few months have been different. But if someone's going to come to a Jivamukti class of yours, what difference would they maybe find between a Vinyasa class or a flow type class or a Hatha class?
Yeah, great question, and a very common question. So a Jivamukti class will always incorporate certain elements that you might not always find in another style of practice. One in particular is the discussion of a philosophical topic, and that usually comes through, or does come through, from a monthly focus that's written by a Jivamukti teacher from somewhere in the world, and published by Sharon and David to the Jivamukti community. So we speak to this focus of the month, which kind of asks us to dive into a yogic topic to try and understand it a little more, to bring relevance to how it could be helpful in our lives in these days and these times. And they all are always so incredibly super relevant. I mean, obviously that's the point, but it's amazing. It's an amazing way to kind of link the ancient philosophy with modern day life. There'll be quite a strong physical practice. There'll always be inversions. You don't always get inversion practice in a yoga class. I think a lot of teachers perhaps aren't comfortable teaching inversions, shy away from it, are a bit nervous about the difficulty level. And so, there'll always be opportunities for practicing inversions to all levels of experience. So always, making one's way safely into them. They're very powerful practices. Inversions helping us to flip our point of view, and as well as our body upside down in gravitational relationship with the earth, as we've all experienced, flipping one way and another. You'll often experience chanting as well. So chanting of a mantra, of the sound Om. You don't even always have a chanting of the sound Om. So the inclusion of vibrational, energetic sound would be a kind of generic way to describe that. Very, very powerful, uniting, and transformative. And meditation is always a component, so you don't always get a chance for meditation in other styles of practice. I think that's kind of it. Yeah.
And how long usually
practice as well?
How long do they usually run for? Are they longer or shorter than a regular class, or?
Generally, they'll be slightly longer. I try and make things accessible. So my Jivamukti classes are usually 60 or 75 minutes. Across the world, they're more likely to be between 75 and 90 minutes and sometimes more. So a more comprehensive practice, a fuller practice, a lot of time spent with those practices that take a bit more time, like inversions and meditation, a beautiful long shavasana, and that time to kind of introduce with a philosophical idea and discussion.
Yeah, I imagine it's a very heavy, or not heavy maybe is the wrong word, but just like I think you mentioned, a vigorous or intense, a lot happening in a short space of time. So a lot to take on.
That's it. Yeah, as a teacher, there's a lot to fit into the practice, but it really speaks to people, and they keep coming back, which I think is a good thing.
Definitely a good thing.
But really, as I mentioned before, transformative. So having all of those different elements of the practice combined together, that was always Sharon and David's idea. It was to create an opportunity for people to experience the practices of yoga that are many, many way beyond just asana into an integrated experience all together as one. So it really does create a potent and transformational experience for the practitioner.
I remember I had one of the sort of required readings for my first teacher training was to read the Jivamukti Yoga book, which it wasn't a Jivamukti training or anything like that, but it was definitely touched on. So I think that, I don't know, kind of made me feel a bit better about my choices.
Absolutely. My goodness, the Jivamukti Yoga book should be a book on every teacher training, but obviously it's not quite reaching that far. But I'm delighted that it was part of your reading curriculum. It's an incredible book and so accessible, don't you think, in the way that Sharon and David speak to these perhaps sometimes esoteric ideas that seem a little bit far off, a little bit woo-woo, like what is that over there, but really bring it into being accessible to translate and discover within the way that we live and the way that we interact and understand these days.
Yeah, for sure. Now, your studio where you teach all these wonderful classes, Yoga Corner in Melbourne CBD, opening back up again today, so very exciting. But yeah, how did you decide you wanted to open up a yoga studio, and especially what it is? It's a hot yoga studio, which is unusual or unique, I guess, in a way.
Interesting that you say that. Yeah. So going back to when I said I didn't want to teach a yoga class and I did a 200-hour teacher training, because I was sort of in this phase of mid-20s, what am I going to do with my life? And finding this place that felt like home in London, in this big, busy city, you know, felt like a teeny tiny ant, you know, it's a big experience for me. And I found this place that really felt like a second home. I wanted to create that. So I knew I wanted to create that way back when. I thought I wouldn't teach a class. That came
I love this. You're just like, I don't want to teach
realization.
a yoga class. But here I am opening up a yoga studio.
I'm going to open a studio. Well, it didn't quite go that way, but I realized a little bit along the pathway that I was probably going to need to dive into the teaching side as well. Really, after the teacher training, that sort of came a little bit more naturally, and that desire to share what I had learnt, which I think as well is a very common theme amongst yoga teachers, is perhaps without the first intention of wanting to teach, but then doing the training and realizing I can't keep this to myself, I have to share it out there. So I wanted to open a studio. The studio in London that was my home studio was primarily a hot yoga studio. And when I moved back to Melbourne, because I'd had that experience of living a corporate life, I knew that there was a desire and a need for balance in that lifestyle. When I had been working in Melbourne, I would escape whenever I could to get to the nearest yoga studio for a quick lunchtime class or after work class. And so that's sort of where the location side came into it. So I realized that in a big, densely populated space, we needed more opportunity. Hot yoga for me was part of the journey as well. So because perhaps coming from the background of an elite athlete and also someone with a very, very, very busy mind, I needed something intense to be able to flip me into that place of, okay, get rid of all of that distraction, get rid of the heightened energy in the body and the mind, and drop into the present. And so hot yoga was definitely part of the journey. There wasn't a hot yoga studio in the CBD when I opened up. And so Yoga Corner was the first one. And bringing that opportunity for the busy city corporate kind of lifestyle felt like an opportunity to give back, basically, and to share from my own experience.
So, I mean, I think I'm just a very sweaty person, and I'm like very susceptible to heat stroke on like a 23-degree spring day. I think that's usually why I've avoided hot yoga. And I don't know if you've ever seen that meme I saw it a while ago pop up on Instagram or something, how it's like, oh, my friend came to me and said, I'm going to be a hot yoga teacher. And they're like, oh, please, you're like a 5 at best. And they're like, no, not like my level of hotness. It means like hot yoga is a type of yoga. That always makes me laugh. And I always think of that. So that's, just to clarify, that's not a prerequisite of being a hot yoga teacher. You don't have to be a hot yoga teacher.
Correct.
But what was it about? Yeah, I guess you've spoken about the getting rid of the distractions and things like that. But and we've seen how popular your studio is and how busy it can get. So obviously it is something that people are looking for. So if you are someone maybe like me who's not so into the getting super hot and sweaty in a class, what's the way you can describe it to them in a way that it'll be a good experience for them?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I guess I would say that hot yoga isn't for everyone, and that's wonderful that you realize that that's not something that really speaks to you, which is why we offer a whole range. We offer the hot yoga, Jivamukti Yoga, Hatha Yoga, Vinyasa Yoga without the heat, yin and restorative yoga, meditation, because not only is hot yoga not for everyone, but hot yoga perhaps isn't for every day. And as we go along our own path, we realize more and more this connection to understanding what we need on any given day, not necessarily what we desire or what we want, but what we need. And that being perhaps on one day, yeah, it is the heat and the intensity to help pull us out of whatever it is that has us kind of bogged down, or feeling heavy, or feeling super full and distracted that needs to be released. Or on the flip side, really drained and really tired and really overwhelmed and needing a yin restore class that doesn't require much movement at all, that has the props to support the body, that has a lot of stillness, but also that opportunity for release in a very different way. So I see the yoga practices as being available and accessible to anyone on any given day, depending on where you're at. And what you feel you need. So, I mean, in terms of someone who's a little bit afraid of stepping into the hot yoga space, I think it is an experience to attempt to try out, because sometimes also, it's the mind that creates these, oh, that's not for me kind of mentality. And so trying something is always a good idea. But our studio is heated to 37 degrees. It's a far infrared heat. It's not a humid heat. There's not kind of humidity gushing around the room. It's quite, it's like a sauna. It's like the dry heat of a sauna. And the heat helps to create focus, basically. So there's a level of intensity there that helps to rein in the focus onto your breath, into your body. It helps to open up the body. So if someone's really quite stiff, feeling quite tight or stagnant, then hot yoga is really great for that kind of situation. So I hope that helps to explain.
No, absolutely. Well, I find that, I think as well, it's that element of, especially living in Melbourne where it's cold a lot of the time, going somewhere where you can be, even just from a physical point of view, where you might be feeling a little stiff, and it, yoga can feel so nice when the body is warm and a bit more freer to move. And and like you said, I think I always thought hot yoga was like practicing in front of a big heater or something, and it's not like that at all. I didn't realize it's like comes from the ceiling, and it's not a little fan that's coming from the side and just gushing like hot air in your face.
Blasting at you.
But we will, I'll put all the links to obviously where people can find Yoga Corner in the show notes and whatnot. But where can people find you, whether when they're visiting Melbourne or when they can visit Melbourne again, or if you are back to work in the city, where can people find you?
So we're on Little Collins Street between Queen and William, and we're tucked away in a little basement space of an apartment block. So it's called Temple Court. And in true Melbourne style, we don't have any street signage. So you do have to just grab the address from the website or from Jess's link. But into the lobby, down the escalators, and we're tucked in down there in a quiet little basement area, which is super cozy and has definitely become a home for not only me and the other teachers, but our beautiful community.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today, and looking forward to hopefully when I get back to Melbourne, which hopefully will be very soon, joining you for a class down there. Sorry, my stepdad's just got home. I'm just going to wait till he comes in before I think this like blocks all like internal sounds of my computer, but not the external sounds. That's all good. No, but thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a while in the making, this interview, so I appreciate your time and really happy that you can be getting back to teaching today.
Thanks, Jess. And me too. It has been a little while, but so beautiful to chat with you. I love all that you do, and the energy that you put into everything is amazing. And I can't wait to see you in the studio soon.
Fingers crossed. Thank you for joining me and Amy in this week's episode. Amy's a real delight to chat to and a real bubble of energy, and a lucky person to have in Melbourne. And I'm looking forward to being back there very, very soon and hopping in for a hot yoga class. I stick to the slow flow or more gentle practices. But yeah, if you're interested in learning a little bit more about Amy and Yoga Corner, or attending any classes, or even about Jivamukti Yoga, you can visit yogacorner.com, and I'll put all the links to Amy's social media in the show notes for you as well. Looking forward to sharing another episode with you next week, which will be a breath practice and hopefully something to settle the mind a little coming into what is a busy time of year. This podcast was recorded on the lands of the Tharawal people of the Yuin Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to past, present, and emerging elders, and for the lands, waters, and skies upon which I live, work, and play. Thanks again for listening to the Plant Powered Yoga podcast. For more information, visit plantpoweredyoga.com or visit the show notes below. I'd love it if you could rate, review, or even share this podcast with a friend. Thanks so much for helping create a kinder world, and see you next time.